Thank you. Let me thank the people of Minnesota for sending Keith Ellison to Washington. Way back when I helped form the Progressive Caucus, but Keith and Raul Grijalva have done a fantastic job in bringing people from all across the country together in that Progressive Caucus, leading the fight for working families, for the environment, for women. Keith, thank you so much for what you've done. Let me also thank Lisa Bender, Representative Frank Hornstein, Winona LaDuke. And let me get to business right away, because I know how passionately Winona feels about the environment. So let me begin by just making a simple and straightforward point. As I go around the country, what I have said as a member of the Senate Environmental Committee and the Senate Energy Committee, climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity, and climate change is already doing devastating harm in our country and all over the world. Now, I don't know what my Republican colleagues are smoking, but they go around the country and they say, well, you know, climate change is a hoax. It is not real. And it is a very dangerous thing for a nation when you reject science. I will not reject science. And what the scientific community is telling us is that as serious and dangerous as the situation is today, it will only get worse in the coming years if we do not get our act together and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. As all of you know better than I do, right here in Minnesota, the oil company Enbridge has proposed a series of pipelines to carry oil across the state. The first, as you know, is called Sandpiper, and it would carry 640,000 barrels per day of fracked oil. The second project is a pipeline just like the Keystone Pipeline. And let me tell you, I was one of the leaders in opposition to the Keystone Pipeline. And this pipeline running through Minnesota is called the Alberta Clipper, and that would bring 800,000 barrels per day of some of the dirtiest oil being excavated in the world. Now, President Obama said that when his administration was reviewing the Keystone Pipeline, that he wouldn't approve it if it made climate and our planet more dangerous. He wouldn't approve that if he could make the point that the emissions from the entire project would add to climate change. Those are exactly the same standards that we need to apply to the Alberta Clipper and the Sandpiper, and that is what I would do as President of the United States of America. The bottom line for me, and I've got 4 kids and 7 grandchildren, and our moral responsibility is to make sure that we leave this planet in a way that is healthy and habitable to future generations. The bottom line for me is that fossil fuel companies cannot wreck our planet for their short-term profits. During the last 10 months, our campaign, with your help and the help of millions of Americans, has come a very, very long way. When we began, as you may recall, we were about 3% in the polls, 60, 70 points behind Secretary Clinton. We had no money. We had no political organization. We were up against a candidate supported by virtually the entire political establishment, a candidate who was considered to be the inevitable nominee of the Democratic Party. Well, in 10 months, a few things have changed. Tomorrow here in Minnesota, you can make that change even more significant. Now, what we have found out throughout this campaign is something pretty simple, is that when voter turnouts are large, when working people and young people, and people who in many cases have given up on the political process, when they come out to vote, we do very well. When they do not come out to vote, and that was the case in Nevada, we do not do as well as we could. So my request to you is that let us make history tomorrow. Minnesota can play a huge, dare I use that word. So I have to change my vocabulary around now. Every time I use that word, it brings forth all kinds of responses. But the truth is, tomorrow is important and key to Super Tuesday is what happens here in Minnesota. We can win, no question, here in Minnesota, if we have a turnout. I don't have to tell anybody here about the extraordinarily vital and historical role that progressive politics has played in Minnesota. Historically, this is one of the most progressive states in the history of our country. You have given us great national leaders for many, many years. You gave us my very dear friends, Paul and Sheila Wellstone. And I am extremely happy that I know in Minnesota you are doing your best to make sure that Paul and Sheila's vision for America is never forgotten. They are alive today in that vision. Today, as I said a moment ago, I thank you for giving us Keith Ellison, who is doing a fantastic job. Now, the reason that we have surprised all of the pundits, and the reason that we are doing so well, and the reason we have so much momentum all over this country, is I think it comes down to one major point. And that is, we are telling the American people the truth. And you know, in terms of truth, I wish I could just tell you all kinds of wonderful and nice things, but that's not reality. And what I've always believed throughout my life is you cannot go forward in an effective way unless you have the courage to deal with reality and truth. We could sweep it under the rug. It would be pleasanter, it would be nicer, but we're not going to do that. And here is some very important, although unpleasant truths. Right now in America, we have a corrupt campaign finance system that is undermining American democracy. Now, I wish I could code it over and sweet talk it, but when you have Wall Street and billionaires pouring hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into super PACs, that is not democracy. That is oligarchy. And together, we are going to take on the oligarchs, and we are going to revitalize American democracy. And when I talk about revitalizing American democracy, it means not only overturning this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, but it also means rather forcefully telling Republican governors and legislatures they will not continue to suppress the vote. They are not going to pass phony pieces of legislation that essentially make it harder for people of color, for poor people, for elderly people to participate in the political process. What all of us believe in is that we've got to make it easier for people to vote, not harder for people to vote. We want this country to have one of the highest levels of voter turnout, not one of the lowest. So fighting to revitalize American democracy, very, very high up on my list of priorities. But the second truth that I have to talk to you about is equally unfortunate. And that is, you live in a rigged economy. Just the fact. And the fact is that millions of people in Vermont, Minnesota, all over this country are working longer hours for lower wages. People are working 2 or 3 jobs trying to bring in enough income and health care to sustain their families. And while in America, our people now work the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world. You all know that? Japanese are very hard-working people. We now work longer hours than the Japanese do. Despite that, mom's working, dad's working, the kids are working. 58% of all new income is going to the top 1%. That type of economy is not sustainable, is not moral, and is certainly not what America needs. So you guys ready for a radical idea? Here's the radical idea that we are going to create an economy that works for working families, not just the 1%. And the third part of what we have been talking about a lot in this campaign is the fact that our criminal justice system is broken. And I want you to think about what we are asking the American people, and where Secretary Clinton and I have very strong differences of opinion about, is I'm asking people to think outside of the box, to think outside of the status quo. You are living today in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. Now, most people don't know that because almost all the wealth and income is going to the 1%. But you have to ask yourself, why in America, in the year 2016, do we have more people in jail than any other country on earth? Shame is right. Shame is right. And just think about it for a minute. China is a communist authoritarian country 4 times our size. We have more people in jail than China. We have 2.2 million people in jail. We are spending $80 billion a year to lock up fellow Americans. Now, as part of that insanity, we have youth unemployment in this country, which is off the charts. Very few people talk about it. Media doesn't talk about it. But for white kids between 17 and 20 who graduated high school, youth unemployment is 33%. For Latino kids, 36%. For African American kids, 51%. Now, you want to hear another radical idea? What do you think about having our government invest for our kids in education and jobs, not jails or incarceration? Think outside of the box. Think about a nation which, no, we will not have more people in jail than any other country. Quite the contrary, we are going to have the best educated population in the world. No, we're not going to be a country in which we have seen in recent years a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, while we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. We could do better than that. Now, one of the reasons that our campaign is doing very well is that, quite honestly, we are listening to the American people and their pain and their needs, rather than hustling all over the country, collecting millions of dollars from the 1%. And as we go around the country, this is what we hear. We hear from workers all across America who say, Bernie, I can't make it on $9, $10 an hour. I can't raise a family on $9 or $10 an hour, let alone even take care of my own needs. And that is why, together, we have got to raise the national minimum wage to $15 an hour over the next few years. And here's another issue that you don't hear much about from the media, for whatever reason, you don't hear about it. And that is, we talk to senior citizens and disabled veterans. And what seniors and disabled vets tell me is, Bernie, we can't make it on $11,000 or $12,000 a year Social Security. And all you have to do is, I want you all to put yourself into the place of an 85-year-old veteran, maybe a disabled veteran, or a senior or older woman. Think about the cost of prescription drugs, the cost of healthcare, the cost of heating your home on a day like today, the cost of buying the food that you need. You can't do it on $12,000 a year. Nobody can. And yet our Republican friends have this brilliant idea that what they want to do is cut Social Security. We're not going to let them. No, we're not going to let them do that. In fact, for them, the bad news is we are going to increase Social Security benefits. And we are listening to veterans, men and women who have put their lives on the line to defend our country, and yet they're not getting the quality health care they need in a timely manner. And our pledge to them is that when you do everything your country asks of you, when you put your life on the line, and sometimes you come home wounded in body or in spirit, yes, you're going to get the health care and the benefits that you were promised.